So now we are going to move on to our presentation. So today we've got two amazing presenters. We're going to have, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Building trusting relationships with families is our topic for today. We've got Yoni, Dewey, Geffen, and Tres Faust. Faust, there we go. Tres Faust joining us today. So Yoni, pulling from his experience as a classroom teacher, as school administrator, and nonprofit leader, and as a manager within the state's largest school district, Yoni has supported education leaders and institutions throughout Colorado with the design and implementation of systems and strategies that center the voice and experiences of our state's most historically underserved students, families, and communities. Incredible. Prior to joining Keystone, he served as executive director of Climb Higher Colorado, where he developed his expertise in coalition building, facilitation, and equity-centered design thinking, all in service of catalyzing systems change within organizations and teams to better understand and meet the needs of students and families. So we've got not just one, but two presenters today, which is, we're just spoiled here at Crush with this echo. We've got Trace with us today. As a senior project director of Keystone Center for Education Policy, Trace leads on a variety of projects supporting districts, schools, and networks with the best practices in coaching to elevate their families as true partners in their students' educational experiences. Born and raised in rural Arkansas, Trace previously served as a classroom teacher, community organizer, school administrator, and the manager of public affairs for Denver Public Schools. Trace is also a proud foster parent with experience in training social workers and human services professionals in how to better partner with foster youth and families to ensure their success. We've got two incredible humans here, two experts, so we're really excited to see what they've got to say today. If we could give them a warm welcome, please. Whoa, yes, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Yoni and Trace, take it away.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Really, really appreciate that warm welcome. I was like, did we write those? I don't even know. I appreciate that. Yoni, are you going to go ahead and share your screen while I'm bringing this up? Cool. Well, welcome everyone. We're so excited. I see some familiar faces on here of schools and districts across Colorado that we've worked with and a lot of new faces. So we're really excited, but we work closely with the Crush team on a variety of initiatives. And this is, I think, our favorite one so far. So we're really honored to be here today. And we're really hoping to create, honestly, a conversation and build on the last two presenters. We actually have worked with Luis when he was in center. And then also we work really closely with Darcy at the state. So I think we're going to be able to build nicely on the conversations that you've already been having, but really want to take this conversation where you want to go. And so like we said, jump in with questions, push our thinking, clarifying questions. We want it to be a conversation and not just a presentation piece. So excited for that part. So today, building and sustaining those trusting relationships and getting to some of that operationalizing some of this stuff that we've been talking about around how to reach these families, how to do this in your classroom when you've got, or your district when you have a million things going on. So that's what we're hoping to talk about today and get a little bit more concrete. So we've got three objectives. One is sharing and learning about effective models for relationship building and establishing that trust at the classroom and building-wide level. The next one is applying a success criteria for that actual trust. What does that trust look like? What does it mean? What are some examples to leading relationship building calls or home visits with families? So we're going to talk specifically around those two structures. And then we're going to give folks time to brainstorm with your colleagues about ways to strengthen and get specific around current relationship building practices that are happening. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel today. We're talking around what are you already doing? What are some new ideas? And what can you kind of dig deeper on at your school? All right, Yon, I'm going to hand it over to you to kind of start talking about the trust piece.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Just want to echo everything that Trace said there. Super excited to be with you all today. Thank you for the opportunity. So again, my name is Yoni, and we wanted to start off today by getting as concrete as possible. So obviously with relationship building, a key component there is trust. And I don't think we always spend the time to understand the mechanics of trust. And so we wanted to get really tangible with you all to share and bring attention to maybe some things that you already do, or maybe some moves that you might be able to try. So just, I don't know, show of hands, anybody heard of this book before, The Speed of Trust? Okay, so a few hands go up there. Awesome. So I think this is an incredible resource, and I'm excited to dig into it with you all and share some thinking around it. But one of the things that I think is important to recognize is whether we know it or not, trust is almost always at play in what we're doing. And in the book, they talk about that you can either have a trust tax or you can have that trust dividend. So what I mean by that, or what they mean by that, and just to connect to an example is, this morning I was talking to someone and I had to ask them a favor. It was a last minute thing. I wanted them to be able to sign on and support something that I was doing. I already had a like multi-year relationship with these folks. So I didn't have to spend more than 2 minutes talking to them. And they're like, yep, no problem. And that's where the tax dividend pays off, right? They already trusted me. They knew what my intentions were and what we're all about, and we were aligned, and it made things go super fast. And we can all probably think about the opposite example as well, right? Where you don't necessarily have that trust, and then something that should be totally straightforward, you now have a million questions coming at you. But what about this? But what about that? And that's the sense of the trust tax that we might be paying. So whether this is visible or not, trust is always at play. And so when we think about building those relationships with our families, I think one of the things that's really useful is to consider, oh, if I invest this time and build this relationship and build this trust, I'm going to see that trust dividend pay off in big and small ways. So whereas it might feel like it's a big upfront investment of time and resources, it really is going to pay off in spades as you go forward. I think another kind of key piece from this text that I think is really helpful is to think about our relationships with other individuals and with organizations as like trust accounts, where we're constantly making deposits or we're making withdrawals. And I don't know about you all, but I've certainly had the experience where I've tried to make a withdrawal from my bank account and there were no funds in that account. And there's nothing worse than trying to make a withdrawal when you haven't already put something in there. So the idea here with what we're talking about with home visits, relationship building, the rest of that, those are investments. Those are deposits into that account so that later on, if we need to make a withdrawal, we've got those funds in there in the form of trust. So, that's, I think for me, when I was reading this, it was a really helpful tool to consider. So let's talk about like, what does that mean though? How do you actually build the trust with folks? And so what they lay out, the author lays out in this book is they identify 13 different behaviors that have been shown from highly trusted and effective leaders that build trust. And they categorize these as things that flow from character. You'll see in the first 5. The second 5 are things that flow from competence. And then the last 3 are really things that flow from a mixture of both character and competence. So I want you to take a moment right here. I'm not going to read them to you, but I want you to first just take 30 seconds, read through these, and I would love to just see if there are any clarifying questions, like what does that mean? This is a great chance. I want us to make sure we understand what these mean. I don't want to belabor the point. I think they're straightforward in some cases, but take a second, look through these, and let me know if there are any things that you want to clarify. What is that? What do they mean by this? Okay. I'm practicing my wait time. Always a challenge for me because I just want to keep going, and especially in the virtual environment here, can be a challenge. Okay, so let's talk about these things that are on here a little bit more.
Yeah, and we had someone in the chat asking, what does it mean to get better?
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. Is it Teresa? What does that mean to get better? That means progress over, perfection, in the sense that if I demonstrate that I'm improving, even if I haven't knocked it out of the park, if I can show that, okay, I'm getting better. I'm improving my skills or my understanding. That's a way I can build trust, because it demonstrates that I'm hearing something, I'm internalizing it, and I'm acting upon it to show that I'm getting better. Even if it's not at the end result where we want to get to, that's one way that we can build trust. Great. Okay. Any other clarifiers?
I would be interested in your interpretation of confront reality.
Yes. Thank you. And who is that? Keith.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the key things, these are obviously like broad terms, right? So it's going to be different for the context. One thing for confronting reality is acknowledging and naming those elephants or those really hard things that are at play, and being able to name them and identify them, and so that we're not like just sweeping them under the rug, right? We've probably all had the interaction with someone who is, trying to put a rosy colored spin on something when it's really just a really hard situation or something that's really difficult, and they don't necessarily name it. And then you're just sitting there being like, no, we need to acknowledge that our school is, facing a huge drop in enrollment right now. Or we need to acknowledge the fact that our families are struggling just to put food on the table. And if we don't confront that reality, whether that's someone's individual reality or an organization's reality, like maybe a whole school is going through a transition period and it's being reorganized, or there's a new leader or something like that. If we don't acknowledge that reality, either for the person or the organization, it makes it feel, you almost feel like kind of gaslit. Like, am I crazy? Am I the person who's just thinking this thing and no one else is acknowledging it? So we can really actually build trust with folks by naming those pieces so that they can feel like kind of validated, and we can acknowledge what's hard, because then we can move through it and address it. But if we don't spend the time and we just kind of sweep it under the rug, or we try to put it, a rose-colored glasses approach to it, which, believe me, I'm an optimist in all things to a fault. But sometimes you just need to name the thing that's really hard. Great. Loving these questions. Any other clarifications folks want before we go on to the next piece? Okay. So what I want you to do, and I am someone who really loves reflection. I know not everyone is going to love reflection all the time, but I really ask that you take a moment and you actually maybe write something down on a separate place, or you just give yourself the time and the permission to think about this. I've got a couple reflection questions that I want you to consider and really think deeply about. So the first one, this behavior is a strength of mine. Look at these behaviors. Which one are you really good at? Which one do you know you do well? And I would love for folks to drop those in the chat, and I might call on one person that I see in there to share out. So look at this list, take 10 seconds. Which of these are you actually really good at? Which is your superpower? All right, Chris, you're the first one there. Straight talk. Tell me, what does that mean to you? Like, how do you do that well? And what does that look like in practice?
Well, I used to do a lot of business transactions. And so basically, and now I do social work in the schools. So I find that, people like you, we don't have time anymore in society to like do all this fluff anymore. We want, and when you're talking to people, usually sometimes if they're on the move, you're having a walking conversation, whatnot. I find with kids and with families, they just want you to be honest and upfront. And if it can or can't be done, and if you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, I don't know the answer, but I'll find out. And so I think it's important that we have our follow through and that we're upfront and just honest, and not to the point where it's like criticizing honest, but to the point where, hey, this is what's going on and this is what we need. Because if we don't ask for our needs and we don't put that out there, then we're just doing ourselves a disservice. So
amazing. Chris, there are so many gems in what you just said. We could spend the whole time on that, but I wanted to touch, like, I heard you referencing it, like vulnerability, saying, here's the thing I know, here's the thing I don't know, but I can try and find out for you because I've got this relationship. So huge. You acknowledge also like the time context, right? Everyone's got a million things going on. And if we take 10 minutes to say the thing that should take 10 seconds to say, then I'm just like, okay, you're just blowing smoke. No one, I can't really trust exactly what you're saying. And then I think you also acknowledged that, like, if we don't provide this straight talk, it actually doesn't serve us and it doesn't serve them. It makes me think about in my first year in the classroom, how hesitant I was to share the hard realities with my students' families, that they were 2, 3, 4 grade levels behind. And I just wanted to make them feel good, but inevitably that just set them up for failure because they didn't have an accurate picture of where their kiddo was so that they could do something about it. And so often we use that excuse or that rationale for ourselves of, I just want the person to feel good, but it ends up making it so much harder for them afterwards. So thank you for bringing those examples. I'm seeing so many great responses here. I appreciate you taking that time to process. I'm going to go to the next prompt. So we said, which behavior is a strength of mine? Which of these behaviors is a strength of one of your colleagues or leaders? Think about, is there someone who you work with who has one of these as a superpower? I'd love to see someone drop something in there and I'll call, and I'd love to hear what that looks like in practice, just like Chris shared with us. Is it Ashley in Trinidad? You put extend trust. Was that for yourself or was that for a teammate? Are you there with us, Ashley? Maybe it
Ashley might be feeling shy, but Adam put the same thing on there if you want to.
Oh, perfect. Adam from Branson.
I'm there. Can you hear me?
Hey, thanks, Adam. So can you tell us about what does that look like for one of your colleagues or your leader to extend trust?
Well, I mean, and even she put it down for herself that she does that. But Jody, one of the women that I work with at school in Branson, I mean, she is one of the most trusting, most caring, just warming people that I personally have really ever met. She's just so nice and so warm, and like anybody could go and talk to her, and anybody can, just tell them how they're feeling, or just be that, I guess you want to say, security blanket almost.
Love that.
And especially me being a first year teacher and stuff, like her and her husband, both, like they just have been they're very trusting and very accepting and warm and positive, and just this big ray of sunshine.
Oh, I think I want to hang out with Jody.
I know. I was like, can you bring Jody?
Thanks, Adam. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jody. I hope you're feeling the love. A couple things that I heard from what Adam shared there is one, when you extend trust, people kind of want to be around you, right? There's this gravitational pull that gets created. 2, I heard from what you said, Adam, from your own personal example of being a first year teacher, and I don't know what your experience is, but I know for me what that experience was like. And holy cow, I was just lost at sea. And so whether it's someone who's a first year teacher or a family who's going through a challenging period, to have someone who could anchor for them is just everything, right? So the beauty of that extending trust. Thank you so much for sharing that example. I'm going to keep moving on. The lack of this behavior has resulted in me losing trust in someone in the past. So when someone didn't demonstrate this behavior, either they demonstrated a counterfeit version of it, or they just delivered like the opposite of it. It resulted in you losing trust in them. If folks can, let me see here. I'm seeing loyalty. Is it Anna or Anna from Alamosa? You shared about showing loyalty.
That was actually for the previous
Oh, okay.
question.
While I've got you on, Anna, do you have one that you would be willing to share? Just a real quick 20-second, 30-second thing.
Yes. Let's see. So probably demonstrating respect when it feels like my perspective, my outlook is invalidated, like you're mentioning before. That's something that quickly will destroy trust for me.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for, I'm not awesome that you had that experience. Thank you for reflecting and processing that with us. I think that's something that's so huge for us as individuals. And also, again, I'm always trying to put myself in the shoes of my students and my families. If someone feels disrespected, just how quickly that can shift the relationship.
Yoni,
Okay,
I'll also
last
add in
one
there, I had a leader one time share the practice with me that when you're feeling frustrated with a family, and I think it goes to these behaviors, like what breakdown in behaviors was actually happening instead of sticking on like how frustrating the interaction was. So was it that they felt like there was a lack of transparency or a lack of, so I think it's really important when we're thinking around the building the trusting relationships piece, because often in actual situations, we're reacting to the behavior and not to like, where was the actual breakdown? So I really appreciate this list in that way.
Thanks, Trace. That's really helpful. And to ground it not as like a reflection of the person, but sometimes it's a behavior in a moment, right? Or something that there's just been that, as you said, a breakdown. Okay, the last one, which I'm not going to have folks share out on because we're going to talk about it, over the course of the rest of the session today. But I want you to think about what is one of these behaviors that you've used or you want to use to build trust with your families. And I would think about, especially if you know that you already have one of these as a superpower, think about what's an area for me to grow in that maybe I haven't done as much. So I want to pass it over to Trace because Trace has some great examples from their own experience in the classroom of ways that they were able to bring these behaviors to life, particularly through home visits and other types of relationship building strategies. So Trace, I'm going to throw it over to you.
I'm muted. All right. Somebody had to do it first. Thanks, Yon. So I wanted to bring up 3 stories and, I'm not hoping that you're inspired by these stories so much that if you close your eyes, you could reflect on maybe a story you have that is similar. And so 2 of these are from when I was a classroom teacher, and one of them was actually from when I was a school leader. And so this kind of sits in the home visit category. And, when we're talking about home visits or we're talking about building trusting relationships, I feel like we typically go towards 2 things. One, our high flyers with behavior, and 2, like attendance issues, maybe communication with family issues. So those feel pretty obvious to me, and I think they probably feel pretty obvious to you, and we'll get into that. I think that helps when we're operationalizing things. But I would also like to extend the idea of thinking about relationships differently in ways that you can continue to build trust with different situations outside of the obvious ones. And so the first one, so I'll make these quick. The first one was a student who was actually my highest performing student in the class. His mom was the president of the PTA, but we had tears probably 3 times a week from anxiety. And he was really, really struggling to feel, and this is actually a picture from my very first home visit. So I was playing spy in his room and his mom snagged this photo when we were like shooting at his sister in the hallway. But it was funny because they clearly had a very strong relationship with the school, and mom being the PTA president and this kid being, very high academically performing, but he was having such significant anxiety. And what I realized was where I kept missing as a teacher was I wasn't really listening to what was going on with him. And quite frankly, it boiled down to social anxiety for him. And I kept thinking it was something, I just kept getting frustrated with him in the class, and I'd get frustrated with the mom because she would call me and be like, what are we doing to support him? And I was like, I don't know. Like, he's got great grades. And so really what it took was I went to dinner at their house. I asked if I could come over and spend time eating dinner with them. And he, slowly was kind of like, they'd never had a home visit because nobody felt like they ever needed a home visit, right? You got a high functioning student. And we sat in his room for probably an hour and a half playing his favorite spy game. And I'm not going to brag, but I think it was a couple of months before I saw tears again in the classroom with this kid. Didn't mean he wasn't experiencing that same anxiety socially, but all of a sudden we had created this space where he felt seen in his own space, and he was able to make that connection to school. So that's my first example of a different situation where a home visit and that trusting relationship and really listening to what this kid really needed. The second one, this is my student Vance. Love Vance. Vance is actually a senior in high school this year. Vance was also a great student, but he was dealing with significant anger. And his family also had significant anger. Like, that's just the way they communicated to one another. And so this was around extending trust. Like I actually ended up going to Julesburg with them for the weekend, going pheasant hunting. And another, don't want to brag, but I'll let you guess who got the first 3 birds on this hunt. And that was me. It's pretty proud of that one. The dad was like, "Wait, you hunt?" I was like, "Yeah, I grew up in Benton, Arkansas." He's like, "Huh, okay." I was like, "It's duck hunting capital of the world." So, but in this moment with extending trust, I mean, honestly, not saying everybody should go out and hunt if they don't know how to hunt or they're not hunters, but it was a simple form of, like, this kid became, he couldn't have a gun at the time, but he was basically like my hunting dog. And he would go out and push the birds out of the field. And it was like a physical form of extending trust to one another. And man, that was a really cool way to break through with Vance. And Vance and I are actually still very close, and I still see him pretty often. The third piece is around demonstrating respect. So this was a family who had come from Somalia, and they had 7 kids in our school. And there were some really interesting cultural things that I had just never understood. And some of that was around the gender pieces, right? The dad was always the one that was in the building and talking, and mom would swing by in the minivan, and we had very limited interactions, but the kids were having really challenging behaviors, and we just felt like we didn't know folks. And so I was the assistant principal at the time, and also the soccer coach. And so I invited the mom to a soccer game, just her. And this is us at the soccer game. So you can tell how it went. It was also because we got the big W that day. But she came up to me, and one of the things she said was she'd never been to a soccer game, and 3 of her kids played soccer. And so for whatever reason, she was parenting seven kids. She didn't have time to come to the soccer game. Well, she made time that day because she had this personal invite. I didn't go into their home. Home visits are not, like, you'll see, home visits can be in a pheasant field. Home visits can be on the soccer field. Home visits can be playing spies in the bedroom, whatever it is. But this third one really shifted. All of a sudden we had access and authentic conversations with a family that had 7 kids across different grade levels, in a way that felt culturally responsive and also demonstrated respect to the different dynamics that we were being challenged by. And so, became friends with this mom, which was really incredible, and saw some significant shifts and just our ability to communicate when there were challenges with the different students. So those are the 3. Again, I think it's when we're thinking about, Yoni's going to go into kind of like the operationalizing, but I just think it's really important to break the mold of, like, who we're talking about and why we're talking about them, and what's possible when you put these 13 behaviors at the forefront. What's possible in any scenario, right? Not just when you need a kid to get a kid to, quote, come around, but when you're just building authentic relationships across the board. It's possible in different ways, and it benefits families and kids regardless of the situation. So
Thanks, Trace.
Yeah, I want to toss it to Yoni to kind of get into some details, because I know folks are hungry of, like, okay, where do we go from here? What do we do?
Yeah. And I want to name, so Tammy from Rocky Ford, I really appreciate you putting the comment in the chat that home visits can feel invasive and judgmental. And so we are not saying that you have to do home visits, that may not be the right context for you, but there are other relationship building strategies. So for example, just phone calls. That could be a way that we can do relationship building, and we can apply some of these same strategies in that context. We could do home visits. You could do virtual home visits, and we'll share an example there. If you look,
but you could go to the pheasant field or the soccer field.
that's true,
right? Yeah, I've met up with people at a local Mexican restaurant. I mean, I love the idea. I actually really love that somebody brought that up because it's true. Home visits I consider that soccer visit a home visit. We were out of the school and we were in a place they felt comfortable.
Yeah, and we've trained folks around the state, and they don't need to be called home visits. They could be called check-ins. They could be called meetups, whatever it may be. So because when you say home visit, it's super important to acknowledge people have associations with that, whether that's the staff or the family. It's like social services, someone's coming to check on me, someone's, judging me, like you said there. So they don't have to take place in the home. The idea there is about meeting the families where they're at, whether that's physically in a place where they're comfortable or meeting them on the terms that they really need. So what we wanted to do, as we said, is to get concrete. So actually this bit.ly link, and Tracy's going to drop it in the chat, has a resource from some of our amazing partners at a group called the Flamboyant Foundation, who are some of the leaders in family school partnership work across the country. And they've put together this resource that really breaks everything down for you. So it will tell you, here are the different phases of the visits. Here are even questions you can ask, whether you're doing a call or you're doing a visit. It runs the whole gamut there. But these are some of the key pieces to focus on. And I think there's a lot of connection here between the behaviors that we were talking about for building trust and these ones. So get to know each other. It really is about relationship building. Focus on hopes and dreams is giving people a chance to talk about the assets, the things that they really are aspiring towards, because then that gives you a chance to understand that and work more in partnership. Focus on what is most important. There's so much information we can give to families and that we want to know, but we got to really kind of narrow that focus. What is most important? And I would say focus on what is most important for the family. Taking the time to understand what's something that you want to know before I go into all the things that I want to know or I want to share. What's most important for you? Authenticity, being yourself. I think you heard from Trace's stories. There are examples of the way that they were able to just be their true authentic self, and that allowed others to do the same thing. And I think we heard that from some of the examples. And then finally, frequent and consistent communication, using that interaction as a starting point, but then following up and building on it. So this is kind of the progression that you'll see. Things to think about before, during, and after that interaction. All of this information is in the link that Trace dropped in there, the bit.ly link. So I really recommend you take some time, check it out, because it really does go into a lot more detail, and I don't think we have the time right now. But on the visit itself, a lot of this is about listening. You saw on there for the trusting behaviors, listening first, and not just waiting for your turn to talk, right? But truly listening to understand what families are dealing with or experiencing. So the last thing we wanted to share is just a systems example of this. So Trace is going to talk about this. Trace, we've only got like a minute here before we go to the breakouts, but we want to make sure we give you all a sense of this.
Yeah, and we can share these as resources, right? So this is just a quick systems level example. This was in Aurora Public Schools, their action zone, group of 5 schools. This was when they were heading into COVID. They were community schools trying to be responsive to community needs with the essential question of how do we know what our families need and are going through? So I really loved, someone in the chat was talking about like, so many of us, are entrenched in this work for many years, and we often get caught up in the knowing how to help rather than listening to the families to hear their stories and how they need support. So this example is all around listening to families and how do you actually need support. And during COVID, we didn't know, what do you need? I mean, some people needed food and some people needed, laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots. I mean, it was like, you all know, right? The needs were vast. So what they did in Aurora was they recruited non-instructional staff to conduct calls as well as educators. But what they knew is that teachers were adapting to the online learning at the time, right? So if you weren't teaching a class, you were making calls to families. So they provided in-house training to folks in all dialers. So 75 folks were dialing families across 5 schools. And they came up with a centralized spreadsheet for referrals, which this is kind of a snapshot of that. And we can also share that as a resource. What that resulted in was nearly 2,000 connections. They did multiple rounds of this. Nearly 2,000 connections made in round 1, same in round 2. They over 680 referrals for resources, so community resources, whether that's to the food bank, to the Wi-Fi hotspot, et cetera. And then 170 referrals for health navigation. So what they were able to do was ask the question, what do you need right here? And then they had like a central resource bank of then how to connect those families. And they were training the folks making the calls to make those connections. So again, a systems level example, but a way that the action zone really showed that they were being responsive to what families needed, even if it had nothing to do with the traditional school day-to-day piece.
And I want to make the connection here think about like going back to what Adam shared about the example of Jody and the way that she extends trust and was able to build this environment that seemed to then reinforce that trust. Think about what the power is of supporting a student or a family in one of their most challenging times, and what that does to the ability to transform that relationship with someone by showing up for them in their moment of need. Like we've always had, we all can think of someone who showed up for us, whether they were already a friend or they were someone who we didn't know, and what that means to you when that person shows up, and how that can then have this transformative effect on that relationship. So you don't have to have all the answers, but by virtue of being someone in a school, you're connected to a network, you can help them sort through, and this just has this ripple effect throughout. So, okay, we know that we're coming up here on time, and we want to make sure that you have time to process and talk in your groups. So as you go into your breakout groups, we wanted you to consider these 2 questions. One, which of the trust building behaviors do you most want to prioritize? And what would it look like to put that into practice? Whether that's through home visits, relationship building calls, or maybe it's just the daily interactions that you have. But think about, how do I really take that and put it into practice? And 2, how can the strategies from today be applied in your context? So knowing whatever's going on in your community, in your school, in your classroom, what resonates? What's going to be something that you want to take away and apply? And we'll ask folks to share that back out. Okay, I know that was a lot of information. I'm going to throw it back to Sandra, and then we'll see you back after the breakouts. So Sandra, thank you.
All right, Trace, Yoni, y'all, we got to give them a huge round of applause. I love the interactions. I love the way y'all contributed to the presentation, and just information you gave to us was just absolutely outstanding. Thank you so much. And we actually have time for one question before we break out into rooms. Anybody want to give it a go? Just one question. So it's like the golden ticket.
I was going to say question or reflection.
Or reflection.
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Before I got into teaching, I was a paraprofessional at a school in Walsenburg, and we had this young man who was severely autistic. And this was the first time that I had ever worked in special ed, anything, along that nature. And I was assigned to be one of his, I guess, followers, one of his helpers. And the relationship and the trust that I built with him over the years, and this was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, was insurmountable, and really was kind of what led me to want to become a teacher and continue, my journey through education. I am proud to say that Mitch is graduating this year, and I was probably one of the first people to get an invitation to his graduation.
Wow.
And, I was only with him for a year and a half, but next to being in Branson and a part of the Branson family there, an education forum is being a part of an educator goes, that probably was one of the biggest, most rewarding moments of my professional life was being a part of that and developing that relationship with him and everything that I did with him and his family. And I look back on that every day, when I reflect on, my life and everything and where I'm at now. And I always am just so grateful for the experiences that I had with him, and knowing that I made that big of a difference even over a decade later. For him to want to send me one of the first graduation announcements that he's got, it really meant an awful lot to me.
Oh man, giving me
Adam,
goosebumps there, Adam.
Yeah, Adam, I love that story, because what you're highlighting for me is that, well, one, incredible job, right? Those relationships, that's the paying dividends, right, down the road. And the two, this is tough work, and it's only gotten tougher. Am I right? Like over these past couple of years. And so what's interesting is, like, we talk about pouring into students, into families, but how do we sustain why we got into this work in the first place, right? And I'm guessing we got into this work because we want to help folks. We want to support. We want to see people be successful. We want to be part of our community in meaningful ways. And so when you make these connections and you have these students show that back to you with their success, right? It like puts gas in your tank to keep going when all you want to do is be like, I don't know, not this. So that's the flip side of this coin, right? Is that these relationships fuel us too, selfishly. They really do. So I do think that's, like, when we talk about self-care for educators, these relationships are, I think, part of that self-care professionally. Yoni, didn't want to cut you off if you wanted to
No,
add.
that's just so true. I think that connects also to what we heard last week with Luis. Like, not only are you physically nourished by the meals that you might, get as you go and visit families, but it just connects back to your purpose of why you got into this. And so sometimes it can feel like the biggest hurdle to prioritize. But I know for me, I usually come out from any interaction with a family like that just on a high, because it reminds me of why I'm doing the thing that I'm doing.
So that was Mitch, right? Cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations to Mitch. That's pretty cool. It's a huge accomplishment. I love it.
I wanted to just let folks know, I dropped a link in the chat. If you do want like a short version of that book, maybe you want to go out and buy it, but if you want just even an abbreviated version to kind of refresh yourself, there's a great link in there that you can check out if you want to go a little bit deeper.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks, Adam. We really appreciate that too. It is time for us to go to our breakout rooms, and it's going to look similar to last week's and the week before that. So what we want you to do is to be able to take everything that we just learned today and talk with your districts about how you can implement that in your backyard. So take some time for introductions. Make sure that you follow the link in the chat for the Google form. Andrea just stuck it in there. So just click on it and it should just pop up. Designate 2 people, one a note taker and one's going to be a discussion leader. So we want someone to take notes in that form, and then a discussion leader, someone that's going to facilitate the conversation. I hope that you enjoy your conversations together. And don't forget, as you can see in the screen in the right side, there's going to be a purple button that says submit. So it's really important that at the end you submit your forms so we're able to just gather them all together. And you can have them later on. There's going to be a crush person coming in, so make just to check in. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and answer them. You can expect someone to hop in there. And yeah, you'll have about 20-ish minutes to chat. And we're excited to hear your thoughts afterwards. Trace and Yoni, thank you so much. And we will see you after the breakout rooms. Awesome. Well, everybody, welcome back. I hope that you had a great discussion with your groups. I'm actually just going to go ahead and give it back to Yoni and Trace.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Yeah, it was really, sounds like there were some really great discussions happening, and we know it's not enough time. So we're just going to say that in the outright, but would love to just hear from you all. So we've got about 10 minutes to just have a conversation. And I think some of the specialties in these conversations is hearing what other folks are thinking about. So I'm going to put in the chat the kind of prompt question for folks to be responding to right now. We want to hear what those conversations were, but really, like, what's one next step? Let's get specific, right? In your groups, like, what's one next step or adjustment you're considering after today's conversation in order to strengthen those relationship building practices with families? And would love someone, folks to just come off mute and let's just talk.
I will start talking a little bit about what an idea that is in very nascent stages, but it came out in our discussion, But it's this idea, like we started thinking about all of those 13 behaviors and how, depending on who you are, your lived experience, your culture, your language, who you are, where you are, those terms can mean really different things to different people. So respect, loyalty, transparency, accountability, all those things can mean very different things. And so someone put forth the idea, like maybe as a staff, we can start unpacking those together in small groups to find out, even just in our, teachers and administrators, what that means. And then maybe perhaps to do some sort of process where we really understand what that is for families and students, what some of those things are.
Kristen, I love that. And Kristen, sorry, where are you from?
I'm in Mountain Valley.
Mountain Valley. Awesome. I love that. I love that. I mean, it sounds like you're saying like that maybe the first step in building trust is unpacking how we think we should build trust. Right. And so if we're looking at those behaviors, what does it mean to extend trust, to show loyalty, all of those things in our local context?
Yeah, because we were thinking a lot about that idea of confronting reality, and what came out is like there are certain things that are in the content, the fabric of school that might be a reality, but starting with like, what is your reality right now seemed to be a really important question. And then sort of led into listening, all of those things. But yes. I just love that suggestion that came out from the group that I was talking with. So thank you, Mountain Valley, for putting that forth.
If I can add, also one of the things that they talk about in the book is that different ones of those behaviors are going to land differently with people, right? Some of them are going to make a bigger difference for trust. So not all behaviors are equal, depending on the context, which is kind of what I hear you saying there. It's like, there might need to be a prioritization that we actually start with this behavior because that's the thing that is the most responsive to what this family needs or what our community needs. So love that.
I also love in the chat someone saying that, asking, and Yoni mentioned this earlier, asking our administration to change the name of the home visits to something other than home visit. Again, local context, right? Like, and Yoni was saying that can land differently with different people for a variety of reasons. For training purposes and conversation purposes, landing on the name home visits helps to just start the conversation. But by all means, I think it's extremely important to think about how would that land. So that even kind of furthers the point of what Kristen was talking about around like knowing the reality of a family and why they might not want a home visit is another example. All right, would love to hear from someone else, some other group.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was talking in our group. I believe that trust begins with teachers building relationships with other staff members or other teachers so that they are able to model that to students and to parents, and just to show that we are one cohesive group. We are on the same team. Also relationships with students, because if the student doesn't trust you, more than likely the parent's not going to trust you, and it just follows and continues on that way. I know, like, I work in our school district and I'm a parent as well. And I hear my high school students saying that this teacher is not liking this or in our students, or they dread these students to come in. And so even though I don't know, the teachers very well, it just is very off-putting, and it's like hard to even want to go talk to those teachers or to even start a relationship with them without going in and complaining first. And then that just doesn't make a relationship right there. And so I think it needs to begin with teachers modeling it amongst the school and creating those deeper relationships with students, not just I'm kind to them or I'm nice or I say good morning. It goes deeper than just having a smile on your face. You need to really get to know those students to bring in, model those relationships with parents in the community.
Stella, I love that because you brought up the point about like if your kids don't trust the teachers. Now, I know with teenagers you have to run that through a filter, but my kid does not like her teacher. I'll call him Mr. M, and he like reached out to me like, "Hey, I want to have a conversation around conferences." I was like, "Oh, hi, Mr. M. Yeah, I have some questions for you." And I found myself feeling that way, even as a former educator, and knowing how unfair that those things can be. But I love that, and I also love the idea of this happening from teacher to teacher, right? Like seeing those characteristics in other people. And we called that out earlier, right? We heard it from, is it Judy? It was Judy, right? Judy's the hero of the call. And it's like watching Jody. Okay. Watching a Jody in action can be inspiring for your own action. So I love that learning with your own staff. Yeah. All right. We've got a few more minutes. Would love to hear from a couple more groups if possible.
I'm going to jump in. I'm Virginia from Moffett Schools, and our started out with COVID and being realistic about like all of the things that are happening. And I'm talking about being a cohesive unit in our school district, our staff, because we've had a lot of staff members walk away from education this last year, and so building trust with the kids and making a commitment to go to their games, and to if something gets canceled due to a COVID, then we reschedule it and we make it happen, and we all show up and as a team and make sure that the kids know that even though we are going through all of this, we're still committed to making the things happen that make school important to kids.
Virginia, I love that. I also love the idea of just a gaggle of teachers showing up at a sports game together. I think that's really powerful. But what I'm also hearing from you is like, perhaps if you're a school administrator on this call, your first question should be to your teachers around what is keeping you from feeling like you could be successful in doing this kind of work, right? I mean, we just led a 6 series PD sessions for over 40 teachers in the Denver area. And a lot of the teachers were saying what their barriers were to doing this work well. And it might be time, like, hey, can we get some PD time to connect with families instead of having to do it on our own time? And what would it look like to shift practice in our school so that you show us this is a priority? Because if you're telling us as a teacher, this is a priority, what are you doing as an administrator to show teachers that it is a priority by giving them time back to do that? So I love that you're kind of calling that out around like, what does it take to build that culture in your school and to learn from one another as teachers? All right, we've got, let's see, 2 minutes. Sandra, am I right? So yeah, okay. So let's do one more. Anybody else out there want to share? Love hearing what folks are thinking about.
I talked about transparency and not so much being, how do I put this? I have this philosophy as a football coach, and I stole it from the movie Friday Night Lights. Clear eyes, full heart, can't lose. And it kind of ties into what they do in Moffett. My version of clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose, and being perfect isn't about having perfect test scores. It isn't about everything always being 100%. My version of perfect and going in with this mantra is that my kids know when they walk into my class, and their parents should know, and the school should know with me, that they are getting everything that I have. There is not one thing that I hold back with my kids. I am completely honest. I am transparent. They get 100% of me all of the time. And I think that goes a long way with the relationships that I develop with the students, and as well as the relationships that I develop with their parents, because, us being teachers, we are in the service industry, and we service children. We are in the business of molding minds for the future and making better generations for the future. And I feel like if we are fully transparent, if we can fully give everything that we have to those kids, and there's not a single thing that we can hold back, that their parents, that in the relationships we build with them and their parents, that everybody is going to be happy, and the parents are going to know where we stand. The relationships with them are good because they know that they could come to us, we can go to them, And I think it just is one of those things where, you know, the more transparent you are, the more you give of yourself, the better everything becomes.
Adam,
Thank
you got
so much
me.
for that, Adam.
Adam, you got me wanting to run through a brick wall, starting off with that Friday Night Lights quote. I can do anything right now.
I really appreciate that point, Adam, and something I want to connect to. I know we have to wrap here in just a moment, but one of the things that I hear is like a through line through a lot of these comments is thinking about what is also in your area of control. It can be really overwhelming to think about designing a whole system or going to visit 100% of your kids. And I want to pull in a thought from another author whose name is Adam Clear, James Clear. And he talks about intensity makes a good story, but consistency makes progress. So don't think about, I need to visit 100% of my families. I can build a habit of every day, I'm going to text one family. I'm going to make one phone call. I'm going to take the time to talk to one kid. And the consistency of doing that practice is far more important and impactful in the long term than saying, I'm going to run this marathon or I'm going to visit 100% of my families. So focus on that consistency rather than doing everything perfect, right? Just trying to get a habit started of connecting with families and building those relationships will really translate.
Sandra, I know that's like the music at the Emmys, right? When you put the little thing on.
Music is playing. Yeah.
You're shutting us down. Okay.
Go ahead.
Make one last connection while the music's playing. One last connection, which is we're going to be back next week, and we want to dig in where you all want to dig in. We don't want to just blaze through with our agenda and miss the mark of being able to go deeper on something. So when you give feedback for today, like what resonated, what didn't, we're talking about communication and building these relationships next week. But if there's something you want to go deeper on or you want to spend more time on, let's do that. And let's not miss the opportunity here with these back-to-back sessions. So Sandra, sorry about that. Back to you.
No, this is great. I was actually going to say something really similar. So Trace,
Okay.
You got it going on. Yes. All right. If you learned something new today, please, huge round of applause for Trace and Yoni.
For more information about Project Echo and upcoming Echoes with the University of Denver, please visit mortgage.du.edu/echo or follow us on Twitter at echo_du_MCE. Thanks for watching.